Welcome to Lyric Lab Poetry. My name's Martin Jago. This video is called the Poetry Salon Workshop, a deeper way of developing your poems. That sounds a little contradictory. The Poetry Salon Workshop? I thought the two things were distinct from one another. Well, they are, and what I'm talking about is a hybrid way of working, which we will come to in due course. But first of all, let's just clarify and examine the distinctions between a poetry workshop and a poetry salon. So a poetry workshop, as you probably know, usually comes in one of two forms: the generative poetry workshop, in which the poetry facilitator or leader offers lots of different writing prompts and exercises, and sometimes they really help to break the poet free of their own sort of constraints and habits. And the idea is, at the end of that workshop, usually a 2-hour workshop, the poets might come out with a few new ideas of different ways to work, or maybe even a few new ideas for new poems. The second type of workshop is more prevalent, and this is the MFA style feedback workshop, the sort of thing that the Iowa Writers Workshop was very famous for. And the way it works, more or less, because the guidelines will vary from workshop to workshop, but usually you have a 2-hour sort of time frame. You have between 10 and 20 poets, and they're bringing one-page poems, drafts of poems that they're working on. They're going to read the poem out loud, and then everyone else in the group is going to offer feedback or critique, and trying to build towards or help that poet get closer to a finished version of that poem. Now, the poetry salon is a little different, and you may not be as familiar with salons as you are with workshops, mainly because I know that they are more sort of private events than they are sort of public, in the public domain, but you do get public poetry salons as well. When I think of the word salon, my mind immediately goes to Gertrude Stein, to the famous Paris salon she had. What is that? 27 Rue de Fleurus. And on either side of World War I, she hosted these famous salons. They weren't just poetry salons, they were salons for artists. There were people like Henri Matisse, Paul Cézanne, Pablo Picasso. In the second phase, after World War II, in the 1920s, there were writers like F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway. And there was argument and conversation and community. There was wine and cups of tea and little cakes, and it was a very social thing, the poetry salon, and it still is. And that perhaps is the main distinction. I suppose if I were going to think of these two things in terms of bullet points, I would say that the focus of a workshop is on critique, the focus of a salon is on sharing, the work in a poetry workshop is dissected, the work in a poetry salon is experienced. Poetry workshops are usually highly structured and organized. A poetry salon is not really organized or structured in that way whatsoever. It's more open. And I suppose the goal of a workshop is revision, whereas the goal of a salon is to have some fun. It's about community, and it's about engagement. And I think it speaks to the culture that we are a part of, that the most prevalent is the poetry workshop, the feedback style, because it is very tools-based, and it really helps poets who are thinking of their poetry in terms of their poetry career, in advancing their work, in publishing their work. And it denies, because of its kind of popularity, I suppose, the culture. We mustn't forget there is real inherent value in the poetry workshop. What it does isn't often as obvious, isn't often as immediate, and often will work in a more sort of subconscious way. What I'm talking about is the idea of escaping the echo chamber of the algorithm. When you're in a group of artists, it's not necessarily the case that they are like-minded artists, and that is a good thing. You will encounter other people, other artists who have very different ways of working, who have very different ways of thinking about what poetry is or can be or should be. And if you don't ever push up against other people's ideas that challenge your own, you never really get to a solid, firm kind of grounding of your own principles, artistically speaking. And so I think it's very valuable. It's very good to have your own sort of firmly held beliefs shaken to the core sometimes by someone who comes in with a completely opposite or contrary idea that somehow seems to work. And when I look around the poetry landscape in Los Angeles, I see lots of really talented people, lots of wonderful artists who work in very different ways to the way I work. Do I feel threatened by that? No, I think it's just wonderful. The fauna and the diversity is something to be celebrated. So that's what the Poetry Salon can do. It helps us to be in a room, not with like-minded people, but with fellow artists whose ideas are going to be exchanged and shared. And that is a really wonderful thing. So what on earth is a salon workshop? If these two things are distinct, well, I found a way of working recently over the last 6 months to a year that I found incredibly fruitful, very valuable, and that I'm here to share that idea. And I'm calling it a salon workshop. And the poetry workshop, of course, as wonderful as they can be, they also, of course, have their own limitations. So the fact that the very first time you are reading the poem that's being shared is in that moment that the poet is sharing it. So there's not much time for reflection before you get to the feedback. And of course, we're squeezed usually into a 2-hour sort of time frame, and there are somewhere between 15 and 20 poets. Maximum, each poet's going to have about 10 minutes. But there is another way that I've found that I'm going to share, and that is my salon workshop idea. Rather than a group workshop, you limit the size of the workshop to just yourself and 2 other friends who also happen to be poets. And it's great to host it in one of your homes, but it could also be done in a sort of neutral space, in a cafe or in a bar, in a quiet corner, where you can unpack the work slowly, slower than the 2 hours, sometimes 3.5 hours. So you have 3 poets, and in the days before the salon workshop, you send each other a packet of poems that you're working on, that you are developing, that are in the draft kind of form or stages. And in the sort of salon workshop that I'm taking part in right now, once a week with 2 other poets, we limit ourselves to around about, I don't know, it's usually 7 to 9 pages of poetry. We never seem to break into double figures, so it's never 10 pages. It seems to be just under. And the first thing I do is, when I receive the emails from the other poets with their attachments of their poetry that they're working on, is to go ahead and print out both of the packets for each of those poets and then staple them together. Then after that, what I'll do is I'll just read through the whole packet, and then I'll read through the packet that the other poet has sent me to. And I'll leave it, I'll walk away, I'll do something else, and I'll come back about a day later with a pencil, and I'll start then marking up each of the poems in each of the packets. And by the time we meet, it will be my 3rd, sometimes my 4th or 5th reading of those poems. And then what we do is we simply, I mean, it's a social thing as well, so we'll eat and we'll drink, and then we will go through the poems, 1 poem for each poet. We'll go around the circle. So we'll take the first poem by the first poet, and we will share our feedback on their work. And the feedback is a little more detailed because we've had longer to consider the poems. And when we're finished with that poem, we'll move on to the next by the next poet, and then the 3rd poem by the 3rd poet, and then we'll come back to the first poet and we'll share their 2nd poem. And so it continues over 2-3 hours. So you are looking in the same space of time or longer that you would take in a regular poetry workshop, but you are doing it for far fewer people, and you're doing it in a more sort of, I guess, in a deeper way, and because you've had longer to look over the packet of poems. And every time I come away from those meetings, from those sort of salon workshops, I have my little packet with lots of scribblings and notes, and I really find it to be so incredibly useful that I wanted to share the idea and encourage you to do the same. So go and find 2 other poets whose work you admire and like, and meet up with them on a regular basis and see how that changes your view of the poetry workshop. Yes, the poetry workshop often yields really great results from people just thinking in the moment, but taking time to think and reflect is really, really valuable. So that is my poetry salon workshop. Let me know how you get on. And I think that, I mean, I love being in poetry workshops because you get to, critique the work of lots of other poets, whereas now it's just these 2 poets. And of course, the limitations will be that after a while of working with the same poets, you get to know their style, and maybe you know it too well. Maybe someone coming with fresh eyes will see things that you no longer see. But while it continues to be of value to me, I'm here to share the idea with you. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this has been of value to you, this idea, and share your thoughts and feedback in the comments below. And in the meantime, if you could, please do click on the like button. And if you haven't yet subscribed, please do. It really helps the channel to grow. And thanks for watching. I'll be back soon with more poetry content.